So how y'all doing today? Welcome to Smitty's, and today I'm working on the Chainsaw Porting Class series. If this is your first video, go down to the description. There will be a link to the entire playlist. You can watch it from start to finish. Some of the information you may not need, some of it you might, so you can skip through the whole process, just take what you need. Got it all set up for you nice and neat that way. But today, this is when we start getting into the meat of it. The important part of the decision making. I did one of these saws already. There's already video of it up, cutting. So, what I'm about to show you is exactly how I did it on that saw. So if you want to copy it, feel free. I'll give you the information. But I'm kind of going to explain to you why I make the decisions I make. And, alrighty. So, I think first thing we need to talk about here, let's see here. I've already hit the lower transfers, the intakes. So today it's going to be talking about scavenging and the exhaust. Yeah. But there are things you can do to improve your scavenging. And in my experience, especially with these vintage saws, is they're big squish saws, but they did not spin a whole lot of RPM, so scavenging was not a high priority item. Now, as we make changes, we can improve that. Or one method you improve that is through your blowdown. I see common numbers around 16, 18 degrees of blowdown on these vintage saws. And I'll be honest, I'm like a 20, 22, 24 degree kind of person. I like a lot of blowdown. What it does, it creates more pressure in the crankcase. So as the piston comes down, it builds pressure in the crankcase, and at that right moment it pops and blows it up. That's your blowdown, is whenever it pushes it down. You know what I mean? That pressure. And I like more pressure. Now with this reed saw, we have this intake side here, and our reeds are up here, so we actually have a little more volume of air to compress with. There's so many things, but I'll be honest. For me, I like to be at no less than 20 degrees of blowdown. But if you can do better than that, do better than that. You can always take it away later if needed. You know what I mean? Now, one of the things you can do about scavenging is you can, well, let me show you the inside of the cylinder. So, the whole idea is to have your charge come up through, hit the back side of the cylinder, swirl around, and push the exhaust gases out. All right, and the more efficiently you can do that, the better your scavenging will be. There's a lot of things that can be done to affect that. But one of the things people will do is they will adjust the upper transfers, the shape them, they'll do all sorts of things to help with the scavenging. On this particular build, I am not going to touch it. I'm leaving it where it is. You can see kind of where I ended my grinding, because there's like Nicosil plating here, so you can see where it ended, where I ended my grinding. And I'm not touching them at all. I'm leaving them where they are, so that whenever I delete the base gasket, it'll actually lower them, give me a little more blowdown. But just a little brief something on scavenging there, because it's basically all it is it's getting the fuel up through here and down and out of the exhaust more efficiently, there's a lot of research that can be done on it, and there's just no way I could try to jam all this in one video. And I would advise you to go out there, do some research, because trust me, others could probably explain it a lot better than I could. But on this particular build, it's not going to be an issue. We just leave the upper transfers as are, and that's it. This is one of those things you start thinking about more as you start turning your performance up higher and higher and higher. Alrighty. Now, the exhaust. We haven't touched the exhaust yet. I got to clean the transfers up a little wee bit more, but I haven't done anything to the exhaust yet. No adjustments have been made. On the saw that I built before, I set the exhaust roof at 103. And I believe the corners were at 104. And I just kind of rounded it over. That's all I did. See, one of the biggest things holding back these saws is actually in the transfers. So that's why I went with that decision. These saws have big squish. I did not adjust the squish, all except deleting the base gasket. So that's why I went with 103. I kept it nice and low. Now, all right, so let me explain to you some of my thinking here, or why I think this way. All right, so me personally, just want to let you know, this is kind of my opinion. Opinions can differ, and I have this opinion because that's the way I like my stuff to run. Simple. That's it. See, I like my saws to hit the wood, find that RPM, and just stay there throughout the whole cut. I don't like the RPMs to fluctuate in the cut. I like them to hit that and hold it. It sounds kind of like Doug even mentioned one time, it sounds kind of like a leaf blower. Just a constant RPM, the whole time. And that's just what I like. Now, with a saw like this, it needs help in order to do that. So we started out with 103 degrees. What that was, here's my notes. Started out at 103 degrees at 87 thousandths of squish. Delete. Now 103, I actually like it at 103. These Super XL Autos seem to really run well at 103 degrees. They do. I would not go further than that unless you plan on doing something about your squish. With a chainsaw, you kind of need to really think about torque a lot as well. You need to make sure you have enough power to pull that chain through the wood and keep that RPM. Now, the longer you keep that explosion happening inside the chamber, the more torque you're going to have. You won't have as many RPMs, maybe, but no, the exhaust roof doesn't necessarily determine the max RPM. It's part of it, but the exhaust roof is more, it's kind of a setting of where in your RPM range you're going to produce the most power. Think of it that way, or that's how I think of it. So at 103 degrees, just from experience, it's probably in the neighborhood of 8,000 RPM is where it's going to want to produce most of its power. So that's the way I built the saw, is to produce its power around 8,000 RPM, with the transfers and everything. If I wanted that more, then I would have to do an adjustment to the squish, because 8,000 RPM without the base gasket, I'd be at about 57 thousandths. That's fine for 8,000 RPM. But as I want to try to raise RPM, I also need to take care of some squish or raise compression. You got to think of the whole picture as a one, or you got to think of it all as one big picture. So how do I explain this? So I'm trying to think of a way to explain this. And let me put it this way. Around 90 pounds of compression on one of these saws, you'll have trouble getting it to run. 80, maybe 80 psi. You'll have trouble getting it to run. It is common to find them at around 120, 130 psi compression, and that's after 40 years of off and on use. If you don't have enough compression for the amount of RPMs you build into the saw, you're going to run into trouble because you need more compression to raise your RPM. Now, there's different ways to raise the compression. You start out by doing the base gasket delete, or you can shave off the cylinder base. You can go pop up pistons. There's a lot of different ways you can do things to adjust that. So keep that in mind. So I reload. So I'm going to put this into kind of a reloading analogy, I guess you can say. Not necessarily reloading, but in a rifle analogy. Imagine taking a rifle and building it with a short barrel or building it with a long barrel. What's going to happen? You could end up with, but the longer the bullet is in the barrel, the more time the gases have to affect the bullet, and it will change your muzzle velocity. So versus like a longer barrel versus a shorter barrel, the longer barreled rifle might have a higher muzzle velocity. But there's, kind of a sweet spot. Hey, Cody. But there's a sweet spot, So you could end up with one that's too long and it causes you to slow down. Or if yours is too short, it won't go fast enough. So there's kind of a sweet spot there. The sweet spot isn't the same on everything. There's things that affect it. Compression is just one of those things that can affect it. Whenever you raise the exhaust roof, you have less time for those gases to affect the piston. And you can compensate for some of that by increasing compression, because increasing compression will cause a more efficient burn. I think too many people have gotten into that mindset where wider exhaust bore gives you more torque and a higher exhaust roof gives you more RPM. Period. I think too many people are starting to make that mistake. And it's not that. It's everything. From front to back. It's not just the exhaust roof. It's just one piece of the puzzle. And I don't know. You know what I mean, I think. It's whenever you get all those factors kind of lining up just right that that everything just kind of comes together, but this is just kind of a quick general idea of what you want to do. Now on this build, again, the only thing we're worried about is getting rid of the base gasket. That's it. And we're going to set our exhaust at 103. That's it. Well, that was the secret to my build. I left the timing exactly where it was from the start. All I did was delete the base gasket and open up the lower transfers considerably. All I did was help the saw to maintain RPM in the cut. And I gave it enough torque to push out to a longer bar. That's it. And a lot of people really liked the performance of that saw, and I think you would too. But that's the whole secret to this. The whole secret. So now all I got to do is set this exhaust to 103 and put the saw together. That's it. That's all I got left to do. But the only other thing I want to touch up on is your exhaust shapes and so forth. Some folks want to widen, so just let me give you a quick general rule of thumb here. A bridged exhaust port, okay? This is just a general rule of thumb that a lot of builders will use. If you have a bridged exhaust port, do not exceed 80% of the bore. So you got the bore is however many millimeter, figure out what 80% of that is. Do not exceed that width with a bridged port. And if you don't have it bridged, 70% would be your number to go by. Now you can play with that a little bit. There's things that will allow you to go one way or another. The size of the bore affects it. The piston rings and how the thickness of the piston rings, there's things that allow you to play with that a little bit one way or another. Sometimes you got to shy on the smaller side. Sometimes you can go a little bit on the larger side. But just a little general rule of thumb if you're looking to widen your port. Now, on the Super XL Auto, I've already done the math, and they're sitting at like 70, I think 79% of bore. So Homelite knew what they were doing. I think it was like 79% of bore. It's been a couple of months. They're pretty wide as is. And the square exhaust shape, that's for, you can do things to change that to help improve power. But believe it or not, the square exhaust shapes are actually some of the better performing shapes. So you can round them. It just helps you. If you grind it up and you round it off, that gives you, it helps get it flowing just a little sooner to give you a little bit more RPM. But if you round it off, it helps maintain some of that torque through the cycle. That's the most common method, is to have the top kind of flat in the center and then curl the edges. That's probably the most common shape for performance two-stroke engine. Or ovaled, very slightly arched over. So slightly arched over or flat with two kind of corners that are rounded over. Those are probably your two most common shapes to use on exhaust ports. But that's pretty much all there is left to do to this saw. I just got to grind this at 103 and put it together. So let me know. Do you have the confidence? Do you think you have the confidence to do this? All you're going to do is take it right back to the factory setting. Make sure you put new rings in. Okay? Do not do this build without new rings. And check your bearings. Don't forget to check your bearings. I'm actually getting ready to do a bearing video, but it's not going to be included in this series. So check your bearings. I'm going to show you here. Here's a good solid bottom end. No play whatsoever. Just rolls around nice and smooth. That is a good, tight bottom end. No play. I can go side to side, wiggle any direction I want. That crankshaft goes nowhere. When I roll it, it's nice and smooth. No clunky, no noise. That's what we want. Grab a hold of your piston. You will have side-to-side play. That's normal. But pull up and down, straight up and down, and see if you can feel a bunch of play. Okay? I don't have any play. Do you? It should be nice and snug. Now, I am going to be doing some videos on bearings and so forth. Simply put, if you want to solve the way that I already built it, I just told you what to do. So check your bearings and make sure they're good to go. I will be posting videos on bearings, bearing replacement, but I will be honest, the go-to guy for that would be Leon at Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. He has very detailed instructions about replacing the bearings, and I would suggest that you go on there and get the instructions from him. He is probably the best source of information on Homelite chainsaws there is. So please do go over there and check him out. Alrighty, I'm going to do a few more things to this. I got to do some repairs, so I'm going to make a couple of small repairs to this, and we'll get it together, and we'll catch you later. Alrighty, later.